Hold on for a moment, because what appears to be joy in their world today is not the whole story. Yes, right now your partner may look happy. They may seem lighter, louder, more confident than before. They may be smiling beside the person they once chose over you, carrying themselves as if they made the perfect decision. But appearances have always been the easiest thing to perform. What you are witnessing is not the full truth. It is only the surface of a much deeper shift. Because sometimes people celebrate too early. Sometimes they laugh the loudest when they are trying to silence what is unsettled inside them. And this is where your understanding begins. Their happiness today is not necessarily proof that they found something better. It may simply be proof that they are trying desperately to convince themselves they did. Think about that. Why would someone need to display so much joy? Unless a part of them still wonders whether they walked away from something real? Pause here. Because what many fail to understand is this. When someone chooses a third party over a deep connection, the beginning often feels exciting. Everything seems fresh. Everything seems validating. The attention feels intoxicating. The novelty creates an illusion of certainty. And for a moment, they believe they won. They believe they escaped complexity. They believe they chose the easier road. They believe happiness can be built simply by walking away from what challenged them. But temporary excitement has never been the same as lasting peace. And deep down, they are beginning to learn that lesson in ways they never expected. Because the person they chose may have given them thrill. But thrill fades. The person they chose may have offered comfort. But comfort without depth grows empty. The person they chose may have made promises. But promises without truth eventually expose themselves. And while they smile today, while they post, laugh, celebrate, and pretend everything is exactly how they wanted, something underneath that image is shifting. Because real fulfillment cannot be forced. It cannot be staged. It cannot be manufactured through appearances. And the strangest part? The more they try to convince the world they are happy, the more they begin confronting the silence that arrives when no one is watching. That silence is where truth speaks. That silence is where comparison begins. That silence is where memories return. Because no matter how far someone runs, they cannot erase what was genuine. They cannot unfeel the depth they once experienced. They cannot forget the energy of a connection that reached their soul. They cannot simply replace what was rare with what was convenient. And whether they admit it or not, they know this. But stay with me, because this next part matters. Their current happiness may feel painful for you to witness. It may make you question whether they ever cared. It may make you wonder if you were simply a chapter they outgrew. You were not. What is happening now is not the end of your value. It is the beginning of revelation. Because when someone chooses distraction over depth, life has a way of teaching them the difference. Not through punishment. Not through suffering. But through contrast. They begin noticing what is missing. They begin sensing what feels artificial. They begin realizing that excitement alone cannot sustain a bond. And one day, sooner than expected, their laughter will pause. Their certainty will crack. Their mind will drift back to you. Back to your presence. back to your energy, back to the connection they once underestimated. And when that moment comes, everything changes. But before that shift arrives, there is something you must understand. Do not let their temporary smile convince you that your story is over. Some of the greatest misunderstandings happen when people judge outcomes too early. The seed beneath the soil looks invisible, until suddenly it becomes undeniable. So while they celebrate what seems like victory today, a deeper truth is already unfolding behind the scenes. What they chose may be giving them pleasure, but it is not giving them peace. And peace, my beloved child, is the one thing the heart always comes back searching for. This is only the beginning. Because what they are feeling now, and what they will realize next, are two very different things. And when that realization arrives, you will understand why this chapter had to unfold exactly as it did. But listen closely, because what begins as celebration often turns into contemplation far sooner than anyone expects. The glow they are wearing right now, it is already starting to flicker. Not outwardly. Not in ways the world can easily detect. But internally, quietly, undeniably. Because the excitement they felt when they chose that third party is no longer as intense as it was in the beginning. The novelty that once distracted them is slowly becoming ordinary. The rush that made everything feel right is fading into routine. And routine reveals what excitement hides. This is where many people face the truth they tried to avoid. Because once the surface thrill disappears, all that remains is the substance of the connection. And that is where comparisons begin. They start noticing little things. Conversations that feel shallow. Moments that should feel meaningful, but somehow do not. Laughter that sounds right but lands empty. Affection that exists physically but lacks emotional depth. And suddenly they begin to understand something they did not expect. Not everyone can replace what you brought into their life. Pause with that thought. Because this realization does not arrive like lightning. It arrives slowly. In fragments. In moments of silence. In random memories that interrupt their day. A song. A phrase. A familiar place. A feeling they cannot explain. And before they even realize what is happening, their mind starts returning to you more than they intended. Because your absence became louder than your presence once was. That is the irony of loss. People often do not recognize true value while it is within reach. They understand it only after distance teaches them what life feels like without it. And now, they are entering that lesson. The third party may still be there. The smiles may still continue. The image may still appear polished from the outside. But internally, questions are forming. Did they make the right choice? Did they confuse attention with connection? Did they mistake temporary chemistry for lasting alignment? Did they walk away from something they may never fully replace? Those questions grow heavier by the day. And this is where your power returns, not because they are struggling, but because you begin to see the truth more clearly. Their choice was never a reflection of your worth. It was a reflection of where they were emotionally when they made it. Some people choose what feels easy instead of what feels real. Some choose validation over vulnerability. Some choose comfort over depth because depth requires growth. And growth terrifies those who are not ready. If this message resonates with your spirit, let it settle in your heart, and if you feel led, leave a comment below with the word clarity so you remember this moment when everything makes sense later. And if this journey has been speaking directly to you, stay connected, because some messages arrive exactly when they are needed most. Now hear this carefully. While they are learning through contrast, you are being transformed through distance. This season was never only about them realizing your value. It was also about you realizing it. Because somewhere along the way, you tied your worth to their decision. You wondered if being chosen by someone else meant you were less. You questioned your beauty, your timing, your significance. You searched yourself for flaws that were never the reason. But what if their departure was not your rejection? What if it was your redirection? What if losing what could not recognize your depth was the very thing creating space for something greater? Think about that. Because sometimes people leave your life not because you lacked value, but because they lacked the capacity to handle it. And now, while they wrestle with the emptiness behind their happy ending, you are becoming more whole, more aware, more grounded, more powerful in ways pain forced you to become. That transformation matters. Because if they return one day, and the possibility is growing stronger, they will not meet the same version of you they once walked away from. They will meet someone wiser, stronger, harder to deceive, harder to take for granted. And when that day comes, the balance of power shifts completely. Because then the question will no longer be whether they realize your worth. The real question will be, will they still have access to you once they do? And now we arrive at the part no one sees coming. The moment when realization stops being a thought and becomes a weight they can no longer ignore. Because there will come a day very soon when the image they built around this new connection begins to crack. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But in subtle moments that cannot be hidden. A conversation turns cold. An argument reveals incompatibility. A silence stretches too long. A truth slips out that cannot be taken back. And suddenly, the happiness they displayed so confidently no longer feels secure. This is when the illusion breaks. Because when reality enters the room, fantasy has nowhere to hide. The third party they chose, the one they believed would bring effortless peace, begins showing sides they did not see before. Traits they overlooked. Intentions they misunderstood. Patterns they excused in the beginning. And what once felt exciting starts feeling exhausting. What once felt validating starts feeling draining. What once looked like the better choice begins looking like a lesson. Pause here. Because this is the turning point. Not when they lose the third party. Not when they admit regret aloud. But when they finally understand that what they traded away was not ordinary. It was rare. It was genuine. It was stable. It was deeper than they knew how to appreciate at the time. And once that truth lands, it stays with them. From that moment forward, every memory of you carries a different meaning. They replay old conversations differently. They revisit moments they once took for granted. They begin seeing your patience, your loyalty, your depth through a new lens. And what once felt easy for them to walk away from now feels impossible to forget. But here is the most important part of this entire message. Their awakening does not guarantee your return to them. Because realization is not the same as restoration. Just because someone finally understands your value does not mean they automatically regain access to it. By the time they understand what they lost, you may have changed. You may have healed beyond the version of yourself that once waited. You may have outgrown the pain they caused. You may have built a life so aligned, so peaceful, so full, that their regret arrives too late. And that possibility haunts them more than anything. Because regret is painful. But regret paired with lost opportunity is unforgettable. So if they reach for you again, if they return with apologies, explanations, or sudden clarity, remember this. You do not have to accept someone simply because they finally see what you were worth. Recognition is not redemption. Awareness is not transformation. Missing you is not the same as being ready for you. Let that sink in. Because the deepest lesson in this story was never about them choosing wrong. It was about you learning never to measure your worth by who failed to recognize it. They may be happy today. They may smile loudly. They may pretend the story ended in their favor. But truth moves in silence before it arrives in full view. And soon, what they thought was their victory will reveal itself as their lesson. While what felt like your loss will reveal itself as your elevation. So hold your head high. Do not chase what walked away. Do not compete with what was chosen over you. Do not beg to be valued by someone still learning what value is. Because your power was never in being selected. Your power was in being unforgettable. And once someone realizes they traded something unforgettable for something temporary, that realization changes them forever. This chapter closes here. But the story they carry about you? It is only growing louder in their mind. And here is what happens after that realization settles in. The phase most people never prepare for. Because once they fully understand what they lost, peace does not arrive for them immediately. Restlessness does. They begin checking the spaces where your presence once lived. Wondering how you are doing. Asking mutual connections questions they pretend are casual. Looking for signs that you still think about them. That you still care. That perhaps the door remains slightly open. Why? Because once someone realizes they misjudged your value, curiosity turns into obsession. Not always in dramatic ways. Sometimes it is silent. A late-night memory they cannot shake. A sudden urge to revisit old messages. A comparison they make without meaning to. A strange emptiness beside someone who was supposed to replace you. And in those moments, they begin to feel the full weight of what their choice cost them. But this is where your path becomes critical. Because many people wait their entire healing journey for this moment. The moment the one who hurt them finally understands. They imagine it will fix everything. They imagine it will erase the pain. They imagine their heart will instantly feel restored. Yet when it actually happens, something surprising occurs. You may discover that their regret no longer moves you the way it once would have. Because healing changes your desires. The version of you who once prayed for their realization is not the same version standing here now. You have endured nights they did not witness. You have rebuilt yourself in silence. You have learned to survive without the closure they never gave. And that transformation creates distance between who you were and what you are willing to accept now. So if they return, understand this. Their return is not automatically your reward. Sometimes closure is watching someone finally value you after you no longer need their validation. Sometimes the lesson is not reconciliation. It is recognition. Recognition that you were always enough. Recognition that their inability to choose wisely had nothing to do with your worth. Recognition that the love you begged for from them was never supposed to come at the cost of your self-respect. If this message is finding you at the right time, share it with someone who may need the same reminder. And if your heart has lived this story, subscribe and stay near this space. Some truths arrive in pieces, and the next one may be the one that changes everything for you. Now listen carefully. There is a reason this entire chapter unfolded the way it did. Because while they were learning what life feels like without you, you were learning what life feels like with yourself. And perhaps that was the greater gift. You discovered your resilience. Your standards sharpened. Your intuition strengthened. Your boundaries became clearer. You no longer confuse attention with love. You no longer mistake inconsistency for passion. You no longer chase people who require proof of your worth. That is growth. That is power. That is what pain was building in you all along. So if they return with polished words and trembling regret, do not be blinded by the emotion of the moment. Look deeper. Have they changed? Or have they simply become uncomfortable with losing access to you? Because missing what benefited them is not the same as honoring what they damaged. And only wisdom can tell the difference. Remember this, my beloved child. Some people come back because they love you. Others come back because no one else loved them the way you did. Learn to discern between the two. Because your heart is no longer a place for temporary visitors. Not after everything it survived. The next part of this story is not about their awakening anymore. It is about your decision. And that decision will determine how the rest of your life unfolds. Part 5 will reveal what happens when they finally try to return. And when they finally return, it may not happen the way you imagined. No dramatic entrance. No perfect speech. No cinematic confession under the stars. Sometimes it begins with something small. A message that simply says, "I've been thinking about you." A reaction to something you post. A random excuse to start a conversation. A quiet attempt to reopen a door they once closed without hesitation. But make no mistake. Behind that simple reach out is something much deeper. It is hesitation. It is uncertainty. It is the fear of discovering that the person they left behind has become someone they can no longer access. Because now, they do not know where they stand with you. And that unsettles them. For the first time, they are the one wondering. They are the one waiting. They are the one hoping they have not lost something permanently. That reversal changes everything. Because the person who once felt certain enough to walk away is now forced to face your silence, your standards, your distance. And suddenly, they understand what your absence truly means. But hear this carefully. Their return is not the climax of your story. It is the test. The test of whether you have truly healed, or whether pain still controls your decisions. Because when someone who hurt you comes back, they often return carrying emotion, regret, longing, nostalgia, words they should have said sooner. And emotion can be convincing. Very convincing. It can make broken things look beautiful again. It can make old wounds feel like unfinished love. It can disguise familiarity as destiny. But wisdom asks harder questions. Has their character changed? Or only their circumstances? Did they return because they evolved? Or because the option they chose failed? Are they here because they finally value your heart? Or because they miss how your love made them feel? These questions matter. Because many people mistake someone coming back for proof they are meant to stay. It is not. Sometimes a return is not reconciliation. It is simply confirmation. Confirmation that your worth was real. Confirmation that they now see what they once ignored. Confirmation that losing you created consequences they never expected. And sometimes, that confirmation is all you needed. No reunion. No restart. No second chapter. Just truth. Just closure. Just the universe allowing you to witness that what left your life did, in fact, realize what it lost. Pause here. Because this may be the most powerful moment of all. When the one who once made you question your value returns, only to discover that you no longer question it yourself. That is transformation. That is healing. That is what makes your energy different now. So if they stand before you again, whether physically, emotionally, or symbolically, do not respond from loneliness. Do not respond from nostalgia. Do not respond from the version of you who was still wounded. Respond from clarity. Respond from peace. Respond from the person pain shaped into wisdom. Because not every apology deserves reconnection. Not every regret deserves renewed access. Not every realization arrives in time. And if you choose not to let them back in, that does not mean your heart is closed. It means your standards are finally open. You have learned that love without consistency is confusion. Love without loyalty is instability. Love without maturity is merely attraction wearing a disguise. And you were made for more than temporary affection. So whether they return and stay, or return and leave again, know this. Their return was never the prize. Your evolution was. And what happens next depends entirely on whether they can meet the version of you that their absence helped create. Part 6 is where the final truth is revealed. And now, the final truth. Whether they return. Whether they apologize. Whether they confess that choosing the third party was the greatest mistake they ever made. None of that changes the most important reality of this story. You were never losing when they walked away. It only felt that way because pain distorts perspective. When someone chooses another path over you, the heart often interprets it as defeat, as proof that you were not enough, as evidence that someone else offered something you lacked. But time has a way of exposing illusions. And now the truth stands clear. They did not walk away because you lacked value. They walked away because they lacked vision. They could not recognize depth while they were distracted by surface. They could not honor consistency while they were addicted to excitement. They could not understand rare things because they had not yet learned how difficult rare things are to find. That was never your burden to carry. And perhaps this entire journey was not about losing them. Perhaps it was about releasing the version of yourself who believed love had to be earned through suffering. Think about how far you have come. You survived the confusion. You survived the silence. You survived the ache of being overlooked. You survived watching someone choose differently, while your heart struggled to understand why. And yet here you stand. Wiser. Stronger. Sharper in your discernment. Clearer in your standards. More aligned with your own worth than ever before. That is not loss. That is rebirth. Because sometimes life allows betrayal, distance, and disappointment. Not to break you, but to reveal you. To strip away every belief that told you your worth depended on being chosen. To teach you that the right connection will never require you to compete for basic respect. To remind you that genuine love does not place you in confusion and call it fate. And here is the final twist. One day, they may look at you again with more clarity than ever before. They may realize you were the peace they searched for in chaos. They may understand you were the depth they traded for distraction. They may feel regret so deep that it reshapes how they view every relationship after you. But by then, you may already be gone. Gone emotionally. Gone energetically. Gone into a life so aligned with your peace that their regret becomes nothing more than a distant echo. And if that happens, do not feel guilty. Some people are meant to experience your absence so they can understand your presence. That was their lesson. But your lesson? Your lesson was learning that being overlooked by the wrong person does not make you less valuable. It makes them less aware. So walk forward with certainty now. Do not obsess over who chose the third party. Do not waste your spirit wondering if they are happy today. Do not let temporary appearances disturb permanent truth. Because if they are smiling now, let them smile. Truth has a longer timeline than performance. What is real always reveals itself. What is shallow always fades. What is meant to last never needs to compete with what is temporary. And you, my beloved child, you were never temporary. You were the lesson. You were the standard. You were the connection they will measure others against for far longer than they will admit. So let this chapter close with peace. Not because they suffered. Not because they regretted. Not because they returned. but because you finally remembered who you were. Before anyone's choice made you forget. And that remembrance is the greatest victory of all. The end.